Welcome to the Three Martini Lunch. Grab a stool next to Greg Columbus of Radio America and Jim Garrity of National Review. 3 martinis coming up.
So glad you're with us for the Friday edition of the Three Martini Lunch. We've once again made it to the end of the week. As you know, Jim Garrity is away. He is in Ukraine. If you're not reading the Morning Jolt, you really need to. Here in his place once again today is Inez Stepman of the Independent Women's Forum. And we got 3 more martinis for you today as we'll discuss what most of us were expecting, Mitch McConnell to announce he will not be running for re-election in 2026. The many twists and turns in the Hamas return of remains of hostages. And one of them wasn't even a hostage. We'll get into all of that. And then the compliance, the malignant compliance with the orders coming from the Trump administration as a result of the work of DOGE. So let's move into our first martini. And yesterday on the Senate floor, on his 83rd birthday, no less, longtime Senate Republican leader, he's not anymore, but longtime Senate Republican leader Mitch McConnell announcing he will not be a candidate next year.
7 times. My fellow Kentuckians have sent me to the Senate. Every day in between, I've been humbled by the trust they place in me to do their business right here. Representing our Commonwealth has been the honor of a lifetime. I will not seek this honor an 8th time. My current term in the Senate will be my last.
Well, and as you learned yesterday, Andrew Cuomo is one of my favorite impressions, but right up there with it is Mitch McConnell on the Senate floor. It's kind of a mixed bag for me on Mitch McConnell. If you go back throughout his career, before there was Citizens United, there was Mitch McConnell fighting against what was then called campaign finance reform to limit various speech. It was known as McCain-Feingold at the time. He won the case and ultimately with Citizens United potentially won the war. We'll see how that fight continues to go. Democrats still hate that. And of course, when you look at his ability to parry with Harry Reid, his ability to use the rules to his advantage frustrated Harry Reid to the point where Harry Reid finally had to do the filibuster reform for everybody but Supreme Court justices. And eventually that filibuster got taken away as well. So, and as a result of that, McConnell was able to work in 2016 when Justice Scalia died. President Obama at the time tried to nominate Merrick Garland. The presidential candidates, including Trump, including Cruz, including pretty much everybody on the stage, said, no, we're not going to fill that vacancy with a Republican Senate. Next president should fill that. Mitch McConnell took the baton and basically stiff-armed Obama and Merrick Garland. That's how we got Justice Gorsuch once Trump won. And then in 2020, when Ruth Bader Ginsburg died, just less than 2 months before Election Day, he was able to get Amy Coney Barrett across the finish line with a few days to spare before that election happened. Now, on the flip side, when he was leader of the Senate, I would say that he did not push conservative legislation very hard. He always said, well, we don't have the 60 votes, but you still need to do it, and you make Democrats take hard votes even if you can't get to 60. As one of my favorite presidents, Calvin Coolidge, once said, it's much more important to kill bad bills than to pass good ones. And so McConnell was very good at that role in the minority. I just wish he'd been more aggressive once he was in the majority. My biggest frustration with him, though, is on spending. He never really tried to play hardball on that. Always complained that the Democrats had the leverage. Even in the first 2 years of the first Trump administration when Republicans controlled everything, well, we don't have 60 votes. What are you going to do? Democrats have the leverage. I never really accepted that. And so that's how we got omnibus after omnibus and the Republicans not fighting back nearly hard enough. So, and as you've been watching him a long time, too. What do you make of him?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with what you said about a mixed bag. McConnell was excellent at getting the Senate to do what he wanted to do. He was a master of parliamentary procedure. And when what he wanted to do aligned with what conservatives and most of the voters that sent him and his fellow Republicans to the Senate, when that aligned with what they wanted, then Mitch McConnell was a guy you definitely wanted running your side. He was very competent in that way. Unfortunately, what he wanted and what the base wanted were so frequently at odds that you have to say mixed bag, right? Like, again, that a lot of the victories that you pointed to, obviously no one who was watching politics for, closely for any amount of time would forget that Mitch McConnell both, as you said, held the seat until the next election against huge pressure from Democrats, and then ensured that Trump's picks in the first term were confirmed through the Senate, sometimes very tough battles to confirm them through the Senate. So when he wanted to, and confirming judges was something that he cared about, he was a great asset for the right. Unfortunately, on so many things, he was actually using his expertise and competence to move against conservatives in the Senate and in the House, and against what the base wanted on all kinds of topics. And I'm not even here getting into like his personal feelings about Trump or whatever, but just on the substance of the conservative agenda. So often, as you pointed to with spending, Mitch McConnell was on the other side and in kind of a sneaky way where, he would vote for something, but he would make sure it would be killed. Right. So I think that's really the legacy. It is a mixed bag.
Yeah. Any other issues specifically that frustrated you besides the fiscal spending?
Yeah. I mean, I think his treatment actually specifically, because if you're going to be the party leader, his treatment, often it was very, very clear from the way that he spent his money and the way that he orchestrated things in the Senate that he would rather have Republicans who are not part of his faction in the party lose and have a Democrat in that seat that he could negotiate with. And I think that, that might be, if he was sort of open about it and he was elected to be a moderate, for example, that would be one thing. But doing it behind closed doors when he's the head of the Republican Party in the Senate, I think that was very just a very weaselly way of going around things. And he was very good at thwarting the will of the people many times. And I know that the Senate is supposed to be a deliberative body, and senators are more personality-based, let's say, that when you elect somebody for that longer term to the Senate, that you are giving them like leeway to use their judgment in ways that are against the direct impulse of the people, right? That's part of the design of the Senate. But he was there for far too long, thwarting. I mean, a lot of the battles that come to mind, honestly, are those from Tea Party days, not just on spending, on all kinds of conservative priorities. He rejected populist correction in the Tea Party days, and he rejected it in the Trump era. And he continued to focus his priorities on confirming judges and making sure the Pentagon always gets its check. The latter, I think, is sometimes good. The former, definitely good. But there were a lot of other Republican priorities and conservative priorities thwarted along the way, I think. Yeah,
so many different moments come to mind. Ted Cruz filibustering the final passage of funding to start Obamacare in 2013. That was a major clash. There was a time in the first Trump administration where McConnell was at the White House in the Rose Garden. He said his job is to maintain power for Republicans. And I'm like, well, that's part of it, but then you're supposed to use that power to accomplish conservative ends. And
yeah, I'm glad you brought up that quote, actually, because to me, it went to the heart of the problem with McConnell. McConnell, I think, saw political power as a trophy to be sitting on the shelf and polished, rather than actually spent and used on behalf of the priorities of the voters that elected him. And obviously he used his personal position to, slip in things that he wanted for a constituent reason or the usual Washington wheeling and dealing. But fundamentally, he saw power as a trophy and something to sort of personally be used for his own ends rather than like people elect you. You have a certain amount of political capital and legitimacy that is spent throughout your term making decisions, and then the voters decide again, right, on the decisions that you've made. And I think he had fundamentally the wrong view of political power. I'm glad you brought that quote up.
Yeah, that was a frustrating moment. He'll obviously remember most finally, like we said, for the three justices, each of which had their own weird fight. The Democrats tried to filibuster Gorsuch when they really had no case to do that other than throwing a tantrum about how Garland didn't get on the court. And so they wasted their opportunity to filibuster the next two, which they probably wouldn't have gotten the rule change on over the controversy for Brett Kavanaugh. I don't know that Collins and Murkowski would have gone for a rule change then, or to kind of fast track Amy Coney Barrett. And so it's just fascinating how the Democrats totally misplayed the Neil Gorsuch nomination and it caught up to him in the last two. So, but McConnell will stay in office till the end of 2026. The race is already on to replace him. A lot of people have been waiting a long time for the seat to open up. And one of McConnell's proteges, Daniel Cameron, former attorney general, jumped into the race, I think, before Mitch left the floor. So it's possible he knew this was coming. And we'll see who else gets in the race there in Kentucky. All right, and as on to our second martini now, and for that we head over to the Middle East and the just horrific story that just keeps getting worse about the released remains of the deceased hostages. Allegedly, there were 4 of them that Hamas released in this grotesque ceremony, if you want to call it that, with the cooperation of the Red Cross. And we're going to talk about that a little bit in just a moment, too. But yesterday, we heard from the IDF that the 2 little boys, the Bibas boys, Ariel and Kafir, were beaten to death. Hamas was saying that they were killed in an Israeli airstrike. That proved not to be the case, and I'm sure not too many people believe that in the first place. But horrifically, the mom was not among the remains. She was said to be among the remains, but all the forensic testing shows it was not her at all. So now outrage is flowing all over the place. The U.S. envoy for hostage affairs, Adam Bowler, was on with Anderson Cooper last night on CNN, and he says, if I were them, meaning Hamas, I'd release everybody or they're going to face total annihilation right now. And here are some excerpts from today from Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu.
It's a day of boundless sorrow, of indescribable pain. 4-year-old Ariel Bibas, his baby brother, 1-year-old Kfir, and 84-year-old Oded Lifshitz were brutally murdered by Hamas savages. These Hamas monsters also cynically refused to bring back the boy's mother, Shiri, and sent the body of a Gazan woman instead, in brazen violation of the agreement. Today, the heavens shake. The entire civilized world should condemn these horrific murders. The entire civilized world should join Israel in demanding the immediate release of all the hostages. All of Israel is united in grief. And as the Prime Minister of Israel, I vow that I will not rest until the savages who executed our hostages are brought to justice. They do not deserve to walk this earth. Nothing will stop me.
And, of course, Hamas is now saying, oh, I guess we got to check the books. I have no idea how this happened, which, of course, no one takes Hamas at their word in the civilized world. So, Inez, there's so many different dimensions to this story now. What strikes you most?
This story is obvious. It's honestly been very, very hard to watch this story for me. I don't want to get personal at all, but, having a young baby, 4 months old myself, just a few months younger than the Kafir when he was abducted. And one of the things I think we should be emphasizing is actually Hamas did not abduct this family, did not abduct those small boys. Gazan civilians did. They danced in past the fence after the Hamas attack, and actually this family was taken by Gaza civilians, and not one Gaza civilian reported their location or tried to free these little boys. The only small mercy in a situation that has absolutely no mercy involved in it is that apparently they died quite quickly. They've been dead for a long time. They died about a month after they were abducted. They were murdered about a month after they were abducted. So at least for many of these 500 plus days, they weren't continually suffering at the hands of their cruel captors. But there is no justification for this. But I think both the manner in which they were returned, this final knife twist and not returning the mother's body, and then more importantly, the way that they were paraded through the streets, right? These tiny coffins with pictures of these boys were paraded through the streets for cheering in Gaza. And this is something that people have to confront when they think about this conflict, is that this isn't actually a situation. Sometimes there's a situation where there's a hostile government, but the people are not behind the government and they're victims in their own right. In this case, Hamas is representative of the views of most people in Gaza. They think that it was good and just to kidnap and murder children, babies, because they were Israeli and because they were Jewish. Without confronting that fact, there will be no solution, I think, in this conflict, as there hasn't been for many years. But I think too often in America, we think that this is a matter of drawing lines on a map. And the fact is that it's just not. It's not there. If it were a matter of, sort of fairly drawing lines on a map, it would have been resolved decades ago. It's about an entire population who hold it as their identity, their central identity as a people, to murder Jews and to murder Israelis. So what do you do when you have that kind of neighbor?
Yeah, there's no way to reach common ground when that basic recognition is not even on the table. I want to get your reaction real quick to what Senators Ted Budd and Ted Cruz are saying about the Red Cross. Ted Budd of North Carolina, first of all, saying, well, the Red Cross is taking part in this disgusting performance, really, of turning over the remains, or what they thought were the remains. And where was the Red Cross over the past 15 or 16 months in checking on the welfare of these people? And Ted Cruz is wondering now if the Red Cross needs to be in the category of UNRWA and not getting as much money, or maybe a lot less money, if they're just going to play a role here. Is that fair or excessive?
I think it's fair. I mean, we're obviously living in a time where there have been so many previously respected institutions and organizations that are basically being stripped of their actual purpose and meaning, and have been worn by a particular brand of leftist ideologue as a skin suit, and then demanding the respect for those organizations that they had previously garnered through their behavior. The Red Cross very well might be such an organization. The UN itself is such an organization, right? So I mean, I think this is totally fair to ask questions about the Red Cross's role in this, and I wouldn't be surprised at all if yet again we have an institution that once Americans across the political spectrum could respect and donate to, that has been taken over by ideologues.
All right, Inez, on to our third martini today, and maddening, but certainly more lighthearted than what we were just talking about. And we're talking about malicious compliance. Jim and I talked about this a little bit in the very early days of the Trump administration, when they were rooting out DEI policies at the Pentagon. And then all of a sudden there were folks saying, well, I guess we can't teach our cadets about the Tuskegee Airmen anymore. Basically making it as absurd and painful as possible to drive a narrative and perhaps pressure against a certain policy. We saw this long before Trump was in office. Remember during the shutdown I mentioned a little bit earlier, back in 2013, when the Park Service would put up barricades to open air memorials in Washington, D.C., where there really doesn't need to be personnel on site, just walking through the World War II Memorial or the Lincoln Memorial or what have you. But it's designed to inflict maximum pain to tourists and other people who want to be there and win the political argument. Well, this is happening again with the work of DOGE. And some of these stories are just amazing. Three of them mentioned here that was highlighted by David Harsanyi. And so one of them is that at California's Yosemite National Park, the Trump administration fired the only locksmith on staff on Friday. He was the sole employee with the keys and the institutional knowledge needed to rescue visitors from locked restrooms. Not sure how much expertise that takes, but nonetheless, or making other keys. I don't know. Wait, there's more. The wait to enter Arizona's Grand Canyon National Park this past weekend was twice as long as usual after the administration let go 4 employees who worked at the south entrance, where roughly 90% of the park's nearly 5 million annual visitors pass through. And at Gettysburg National Military Park in Pennsylvania, last week's widespread layoffs gutted the team that managed reservations for renting historic farmhouses. Visitors received notifications that their reservations had been canceled indefinitely. So, and how do you figure out which ones are legit and which ones just seem to be shut down theater, like we used to call it? What do you make of these places making it as draconian as possible as they react to some of these decisions made in Washington?
Yeah, first of all, to add a few examples from that shutdown, not only did they close open air memorials, they closed turnoff like vistas on highways overlooking national parks. So like they sent someone that they allegedly don't have, right, out there to put up barriers to prevent people from turning onto a separate little, turn off that merely overlooked a national park, okay, that does not require any personnel to operate, right? And they actually finally overplayed their hand and tipped their hand during that by trying to shut down Mount Vernon. So the guys came out to shut down, to like put up the barriers, to put up chains across the entrance of Mount Vernon. Well, it turns out Mount Vernon is privately run. It's not actually run by the federal government, but these people were sort of so dumb that they didn't realize that George Washington's house is privately managed, and so they showed up to shut it down, right? So that's how far this kind of shutdown theater went last time. Look, it's an old trick, right? If you want people to pay for raising their taxes, right, a municipality, you fire the librarians, the firefighters, the police officers, the people that people actually want to pay, and not the bureaucrats who are doing very little, at best doing very little. Often in the case of the federal government, they're actually, pernicious actors. But, you fire the people instead of firing the people who are behind the scenes who aren't doing the job. You fire the 4 people that are actually public facing, and try to cause as much pain as possible. So this is obviously theater. I think the big difference between the shutdown back then and this is, frankly, the fact that we have, first of all, one major free speech platform, X, under Elon Musk, who's shining a huge spotlight on all of these things. And second, that the power of the legacy media really does seem to be broken to a certain extent. Like, people are more skeptical. They're not just going to read a story like this and take it at face value, right? They are going to hear that counter from the right saying, this is not what's required. This is, quote unquote, malicious compliance, right? And I think it's a very good phrase, honestly, to describe what's happening. It's a dishonest attempt to inflict the most public-facing pain possible to try to save the jobs of people who are doing things that the American people would be horrified and are horrified increasingly to find out, what they're doing with their time and what they're being paid for it.
Inez, great to have you with us the last 3 days. Thank you so much for your time and your insights, and we'll talk to you later.
Thanks. It's been great to be here.
Thank you. Inez Stepman of the Independent Women's Forum. I'm Greg Corumbus of Radio America. Thanks so much for being with us today. We hope you have a great weekend. In the meantime, please subscribe to the 3 Martini Lunch podcast. If you haven't already, tell your friends to do so as well. Thanks for your 5-star ratings and your kind reviews. Please keep those coming. Get us on your home devices. All you have to say is play 3 Martini Lunch podcast. Follow us all on X. She's at Inez Felcher. Jim is at Jim Garrity. I'm at Greg Corumbus. Have a terrific weekend. Join us again Monday for the next 3 Martini Lunch.